It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this first session on cybersecurity for interconnected systems. We have three speakers in this session, and the first one is Professor Deepanita Roy Chaudhary from IIT Kharagpur.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Professor Shanadha, for the introduction. So today I'll be talking one topic that cybersecurity challenges and countermeasure for implantable medical devices. Actually, this is in the intersection of healthcare technology, cryptography, and the safety critical systems, or we can tell some cyber physical systems, some secure cyber physical systems. So, outline of my talk. First, I'll give some introduction that what is the implantable medical devices are, and uh, and why the security is a major concern for these IMDs. Okay, then a lot of research requirement that mainly today I'll be telling that part, the research motivation, that what are the challenges and why it is so critical. And then the cybersecurity challenges in IMD environment, because there are restrictions and why it is important, but still why not people are working. And then the security threats, that means what are the attacks or from security concerns actually. Then security goals. So what will be the environment that we have to prepare or we should provide so that we get a secure IMD. And then most of the things are future scope of work, because particularly in our country and all over world, this is a very new topic, but probably within 5 years, it will be actually coming in big shape. And then the current challenges, or actually what we should do. So as I told that I've given the recommendation thing. Okay. So first thing is that what is implantable medical devices? So that in one sentence, I should tell that this is the embedded technology for human health. And that actually this is, I have kept in two parts. One is that left part, it is miniaturized internal technology, and where actually these implantable medical devices are some, we can think then some hardware equipment, like some chip which is surgically placed in our human body, and that replace or monitor our some physiological functions. So very simple way if I tell, this is the thing. And the second part is that, again, we can define autonomous life management. So these devices are actually, they operate and they continue to give support to our these physiological functionalities. So this enhancing the health outcomes to automated therapeutic intervention. So not only it is placed, but actually to continue. And here actually the security part comes in picture. So slowly I'll be coming there. So very simple way. So this is the thing. And now see, there are many. Just I have given very, which is very popular. But actually nowadays there are many such IMDs from small chips to big one, and with very important functionalities that is there. These are actually which are very popular that we have given. So this is some deep brain neurostimulators. Actually, this stimulates and even that very that important things, that is our normally nowadays we see the depression. So actually this stimulates, and it works very well for the, automatically it stimulates whenever required, and it controls the depression. And then many others, that diseases, that important diseases, it actually, that epilepsy and this thing, it works very well. But one thing, okay, later. And these cochlear implants, this is actually the auditory of this, the ear, that again it is a stimulation, and whenever required, automatically that it will stimulates. And these are all automated, not needed every day to monitor that thing. but some monitoring is required, and there the security is there. So this is some gastric stimulators, and this is most important thing. And in our country also, even last almost 8 to 10 years, that many hospitals they are using these cardioverter defibrillators. We just immediately we can think this is as the alternate of pacemakers. But it has many other functionalities, and there are variants. If we go some hospital, that good hospitals website, we will be seeing that what are the different variants, like Peerless Kolkata. They're using so many variants of this thing, starting from that, even the price from 20,000 to 6 lakhs, like that. So they're almost all are using, particularly in India. It is actually, this is very, very important thing, and because it is replaces some of the functions of the pacemakers. Similarly, foot drop implants, actually this is something, some stimulus for our muscles. And then insulin pump, this is another thing. Almost every people are using, and one very good thing is that in our country that actually is in very cheap, the chips or IMDs are available for this. So there are many such. These are very popular, but there are nowadays that actually the chips are implanted. That's, as I already mentioned, surgically placed, and they are this thing. Now the question is, okay, then where is the security is coming? Security is coming. So before that, just we see that, quickly we see that what is the picture worldwide. So this is actually a breakthrough. So only 1 year, this left-hand side, that this is the 1 year's statistics, and we are seeing that actually in US that it is mostly there it is used, and from 96 million to double that type of things are there. And even in other regions also, it is slowly it is growing. So it is nowadays, now it is not an experiment. Now it is actually established and all over world that people are doing. Now evolution is, quickly if I tell that 1958, the first pacemaker, again this is the, what actually nowadays the implantable cardioverter defibrillator I told is ICD nowadays. Now this is earlier, it is the original, it is started with this thing, that 1950 first pacemaker, but that time it is only standalone mode, it is only placed and then used to. So that time surgery was required, like our conventional pacemakers. Now this 1970, that actually telemetry added. So there only that one-way communication that is started. So this is actually the breakthrough comes from 1970. Then 1999, that again, that this is that government has given some bandwidth that can be used for this communication, and actually the both-way communication started. And now 2006, there are many ways it has come, and it is actually continuing. So slowly I'll try to give the picture. So where is this? It is now up to this. There is no security things are there. So just I give one example, that communication environment. So first thing is like pacemaker or ICD, that defibrillator, what I was telling, that type of thing. And see, it's a programmer, or normally we call in technical term is device programmer. Just we think this is a computer. Okay. And this is something, and here actually the doctors and the assistants, or these are authorized, so they are here. So this is a very simple model, all over world people are doing that thing. So here they are communicating, because we get now this is a both-way communication, but always we'll try that since these pacemakers, we understand that whatever these IMDs are, they are resource constant, because they are implanted on our body. So they have battery powered, and not that these batteries are rechargeable, and they have very less memory. Computing facility is also very less, not very small processors are there, not our big one thing. So these communication between these two, this will be very, we try to make it the restricted, but still we have to do all the things. So here, this tag 2, this device programmer has a lot of responsibilities. So here we can use some good computers, some this thing, and a lot of, and these doctors that actually they will be, mainly see this internet is here. So here we can do, and most of the things we will be using here, and then the access or the interaction will be very limited, so that the it is that security part or even other difficulties that may not arise. So first thing is that where the security. So one small thing is that these are monitored from outside. So that is the small thing that is the very important now. So since they are monitored from outside, whether it is a doctor or that other medical assistance, so since it is a remotely monitored, so not all people will be the good people and they will be doing the good things. So many times that this is the first thing, that people can do some harm. That means what is not required, that is, they may actually do the things. And now this, what they can do which is not required, that list is growing day by day. And then security concerns are there. So interaction, our aim is that user-computer interaction. So most of the processing-related security may be performed on the computer only. And computer IMD interaction, only the sensitive operation associate the IMD, that only will be doing here. This is the overall philosophy all over world that we are doing this research. This is the model. Okay. So this is the model. So now that this wireless access, a threat surface for implantable device. So from where the security is coming. So see that possible security breach can lead to vulnerable situations. So modify legitimate IMD operations, mainly these three are there. So what are the IMD operations? Because doctor has to tell that whether I have to give a small pressure to the ICD. Okay, now if in between this is some IMD operations, now it is actually all commands are there. So if I just change the commands, say I have to say increase the pressure. Instead, if I give that only one parameter, that if I make it that decrease the pressure, then it's actually a life threat. So, and the reverse also. This is one example. And there are a lot of this type of operations, and it varies from IMD to IMD because functionalities are different. Then misuse patient-specific private treatment logs. And then this is one of the things that normally now in many other areas also we are doing the theft of that patient data. But here it is very critical in that sense that if we have access on that patient data and if we change, then actually say the doctor will get the wrong logs, wrong informations, and based on that the doctor will take the wrong decision. So this is also very, very important. And another, the deplete battery power unnecessarily. This is the simplest way that attacker can do. So since it is a non-rechargeable, normally the 6 to 10 years that type of support it has, that battery works. And now if unnecessarily we just try to access that thing, so nothing, probably it is very much secured, we cannot do anything. But every time that the IMDs have to work, and so what they will be doing, that battery will actually deplete, so battery will be rich. So this is the most, we should tell that innocent, but dangerous, because then again surgery is needed, that type of thing. So what is now, we are calling embedded system security. Now we understand that these IMDs that are actually placed on the body, like we can think this is the embedded systems, and or even ASIC we can tell. So these are the ASIC for secure IMD, that should be the goal, because nowadays the IMDs are available, but no security is there. Till date, that no security is there. So identify the relevant attacks and the analysis of embedded system security. Because we understand the functionality of IMDs are different, so obviously attacks will be different, and so everywhere that we have to identify the attacks. Then design and implement lightweight crypto primitives for encryption and authentication. So all over world, that very few groups they are working, but what we and other group also that we are doing. So if we can apply the cryptographic protocols or primitives, that should be lightweight, because for the resource constraint things, because at least some part that ICD should be involved. So even the device programmer, the tier 2, so they do the most of the computing, but I have to do that thing. So that's why this lightweight crypto primitives to identify and to this is one of the challenge here. And then design FPGA or ASIC prototype of secure IMD. As already I mentioned, many IMDs are available, but till date, to the best of our knowledge, that not security is there, but all over world that people are actually trying to do that thing. I'll tell here some of the things, that why it is not, etc. So, solution, very roughly I will tell. Now, slowly we'll be going in slightly details that with continuous authentication, it would be very nice, because at least if we assume that the doctor has some password, and then this is some authentication is every time to access, at least some authentication is required. So this authentication is very, very important here. Then proximity-based access control, continuous authentication, and then lightweight access control protocol, or design of lightweight authenticated encryption. So authentication encryption, because what we have identified when we have seen the ICD commands, then few commands are actually only encryption is required. For few commands means the attacks, if we consider, only authentication is all. But for some of them, both authentication and encryption. So whether the lightweight scheme can be good, because that we have to every time we have to remember that here the environment is totally different, because here we have not much processing power. So with how far we can do with this, and then the ASIC design or FPGA, whatever we tell. So as I told, the research motivation, because here a lot of things, people have just started, only few groups they are working, but within already in US this type of attack is started, and so we must be very careful about this. So the widespread global reliance on IMDs and the immense lack of security measure for the IMD environment, and the vulnerable wireless telemetry over the network and radio frequency communication. One of the most active IMD is implantable cardioverter defibrillator, as already I mentioned. If you just give a survey, you will be seeing in India also that most of the good nursing homes or hospitals, they are actually variants of ICDs they are using, and illegitimate access to sensitive configurations of ICD patients' private health data. Just the previous slide I told. There are many more. Just very abstract way I told that why it is necessary, and where many areas actually, this is interdisciplinary area. So even later I'll be telling that even chemistry, etc., that is also there, I'll be coming slowly. So security challenges in medical implants, there are many, but if the most important two things, if I note, that one is for that resource constraints, already I told, is a very limited CPU power, memory, and battery life is 7 to 10 years, non-rechargeable. Security must not compromise primary life-saving function, because just if I give a different command, so it will be life-threatening. That I have to increase the pressure. If I just in place I tell that okay, decrease the pressure, then it's a, and similarly all such commands are there. Then so this is one, these are actual challenges, that resource constraint environment to embed the security. Then communication constraints. So wireless communication drains battery and emits radiation, and risk of RF exposure to nearby issues. Obviously, wireless communication, actually this is a breakthrough, and particularly this type of application. But again, parallelly, that this type of disadvantages are there, particularly here. And then weak body-induced fading channels limit performance, or traditional wireless security methods are inefficient because for the above restrictions. So there are many more, at least these two broad things I tried to know. And then quickly we see that what type of attacks. This is overall, but obviously this IMD to IMD, it will change the thing, which one will be prominent for. So data manipulation attack, resource depletion attack, that communication attack. Under communication attack, that normal cryptography security, that you know, that this type of replay attack, denial of service attack, man in the middle attack. And firmware injection attack, that is actually very, very critical here. So these are some of the attacks with cyber security threats. So data manipulation attack, that actually from the name itself we understand that the device programmer and the ICD, as already I mentioned. So this we can think a proper computer, that most of the tasks we want to do there, we have a good server. And these IMDs are, this is the thing. So if it is an attacker, so it will be data manipulation attack, that it will actually try to, because it's a wireless communication, so normal, our common wireless attacks that we consider in cryptography, that type of things, it will be there. So this is some malicious external device. A resource depletion attack, already I mentioned, the battery will deplete if more, not actually even some unnecessary communication we are doing, just we are trying to access. Nothing we can do, but actually every time you have to check whether it is a legitimate user or not, authorized user, and for that some battery will go down. So then the eavesdropping attack and the denial of service attack, the normal our communication attack, that external product, and see this external programmer and this IMD, actually this eavesdropping will be there. That means it will try to put the attack here, normal things. Denial of service, and but here also denial of service is again that it will also affect the battery. Now replay attack, that earlier if normally the protocols use some nonce or some ID, so if some previously used some parameter, if they want to again reuse the replay, we know. And then again man in the middle attack, so actually when the data is communicating, if we can want to change that thing, so it will be this type of attacks. This is actually very, very important thing, that firmware injection attack. So actually we can think this is a software attack like that. So but it is very, nowadays this becomes a very crucial thing, that counterfeit software. So they are actually changing because for IMDs there are, we understand for this is for say ICD or say insulin pump, there are actually some, what are the commands, what are the actual commands that will be there. If people change that thing, it is the same, some device programmer. So it will change and give that thing, then it will be actually a security thing and it will not work. So nowadays people are actually working here. So now see that, as already I mentioned, particularly our country and others also, that ICT is mostly used, and there were variants of ICTs, different functionalities. And so there are components are like more or less these are the pulse generator and the electrodes, actually the connectors are there. So therapy are just quickly giving example that say anti-tachycardia pacing to correct fast rhythms, ATP. And defibrillation is deliver a high energy shock. And then bradycardia pacing is maintain heart rate when it becomes too slow. And cardioversion, lower energy shock to restore normal rhythm. So normally commands are actually made on these 4 things. There are many other small, these are the broad force. Now we understand that if any one of these things, if we change, and then it will be actually in danger for or it is life-threatening for the patient. So these are the things. And Okay, these are already I mentioned that communication things, security gaps in ICD communication. So already these are the mentioned. So research requirement, this is very new, but lot of research is required to identify confidentiality and integrity requirements for functional model-based ICD communication. And from ICD I am telling, but is actually number of IMDs are there. So for everyone, there will be actually separate research will be there because functionalities are different. So comments are also obviously different, attacks will be different, countermeasure will be different. To design a lightweight authentication scheme tailored for secure IMD device. So here, one thing is that whether cryptographic primitives, lightweight cryptographic primitives that we can use, identify the relevant cyber attacks for a particular IMD. As I already told, IMD to IMD will vary, and then to mitigate identified cyber attacks. Overall, these are the overall things. If we work any one of these bullet, actually that will be a research. So these are the protocol for secure ICDs, mainly that some optimized data transmission, because always we remember that this is a resource constraint. We don't have enough memory in the ICD. So actually protocol also we have to select in proper way that it will be there. Then key management, because normally the doctor that who is the authorized doctor, the doctor has some ID, and there are some dynamic, that is some keys generated from that ID, and dynamic key. So there are two keys. One is master key, one is session key, and session key is normally changing. So this key management is one of the things. Because if somehow the attacker or the mischiever, they get the access of the key, any session key also, then it will be actually a problem. And then lightweight encryption scheme, lightweight authentication scheme. So only on ICD, we started working on last 6 to 7 years. We are working in our group, and normally we do crypto and cryptographic research and VLSI also. So here, this is one application area we can think as a cyber physical systems. We worked on this ICD, and recently we have published. This is one paper is available where actually we have, other than key management is again separate thing that we have actually tried to give this thing. Okay, and like quickly, this is the this can be a data transmission structure. Even we can think this is just we have taken, like you see that how small it is, only the 128 bit. But you may try for this thing. Just I'm telling that where the scopes are there. Then again, the secure identification and cross-clinic accessibility. So normally all over world that the people are doing, so they are they're taking that authorized doctor, they have some password, what is actually from there the master key can be generated. So in our country, the National Medical Register, they give a 32-bit numbers to all registered doctors. So now currently people are using that thing. We have also worked on that. We have taken that thing. And the ICD itself holds a unique identifier. And because every ICD, like our network, computer network, it has its own ID. Similarly, that all ICDs have some unique number, and that it ensures traceability and trust in communication between these. So normally, this is the secure medical practitioner. And this cross-clinic accessibility. This is again nowadays is very, very important, because normally this is fixed environment. Say here in Kanpur that one doctor is actually allotted there. But if suddenly if the patient is moved to other, even in our country, other city, then actually who will be doing the thing? Who will be working? So that's why now this cross-clinic accessibility, that is also, so that other doctor can actually handle. Otherwise, only the authorized doctor in Kanpur, only he or she will be responsible for this. So this is again another research that, and people are trying to embed this thing. So there are very small issues, but very, very important, because this is very common that patient will be moving to some other city or some other country. So this is overall just I am trying to give just how that device programmer and ICD, that communication is very crucial, because otherwise device programmer to the medical practitioner, that is actually computer to computer, that all of we know. So here actually we have tried that to go that some random nonce, and always we have to, always what we have tried, that to only 128-bit format, and then but what is essential, what data are essential, that will be. So P is, this is a raw data or instruction. So this is the one thing, that data manipulation attack, what people will try to access this part. Then it is encrypted and data instruction. Actually, it depends on command to command. And this type of, this encrypted, non-decrypted. So this is one. Actually, there are people are working, and we may give that thing. So for security, mainly the confidentiality and authentication that is required. So at least these two we have identified, and we are trying to use that thing. Key management we have not yet done, but again, it is very, very important. We are working on that. So some master key, and they are actually, you have to incorporate so that other registered doctor can also do that thing. What? And the issues are there. And always the lightweight thing. Always we remember, because we have that also we have tried. Actually now we are trying what is conventional or standard in our cryptographic protocols, cryptographic primitives, that lightweight thing we try to do that thing. So, okay, why authentication encryption, we understand this is one of the attack. We have shown that how actually people are just data, they are manipulating only few bits if they are changed, and then actually it is giving some life-threatening comments for them. Again, replay attack and these things. So I quickly come to the very important thing. So there are future scopes are there already I mentioned, but what actually current challenges I have identified mainly two. So one is that prototype development for secure RMD, because now this is a hardware chip, but till date, at what we have surveyed and all over world, that there is no security component. And the vendors, but we will be coming next slide. So first thing is that even if what we are doing that thing, that actually in practice, how far we can embed there. So these are the things, that challenges that integrating, because separately standalone mode that cryptographic protocol is working, or these communication things, etc. But together, how they are doing this type of thing is there. What I was telling, that even chemistry, that interdisciplinary thing is there. This biocompatibility and durability, not our concern at this stage, is very, very important, because that material should be such that it should not hamper, or it should not be some problem that non-toxic inside the body. So again, many people are working here. This is pure chemistry people, they are doing here, but they are giving that thing. So these are the things. So we think that even from engineering concept, that these are our concern. So immediately what we can do, that separately there's so many things, together how can we integrate, and we can do the design. This is one. And then next one is that this is one of the things, because recently I attended in France that conference. So what is that? If there is no regulation, even all over world, now all people are trying to do that thing. That one example I'm giving, that if we buy, we cannot directly buy that some registered doctor, they will buy some IMD. So actually the vendors are not giving any information. That is the most dangerous thing. So they are not giving, because till date, none of the countries is actually these ethical things are actually there. So legal and ethical responsibility. So nothing is there. So what we saw that in Europe, actually from 2010, they started that thing, and currently it is actually a big group. Even many cryptographers, actually they are the part. Many senior cryptographers are actually, they are coming to law, the cryptography law, because this is, and since it is actually life-threatening thing. So on 2017 only, 10 they have started, 17 only they used comprehensive software cybersecurity obligations, and this is 2024, that some Cyber Resilience Act, and that mandates secure by design development. Means they have to tell that it should be transparent to the patient party also. Okay, so these regulations are there. And USA, again, they have the different rules that FDA, and is very big and now, but they are again very big group that all medical practitioners, the doctors, and particularly cryptographers, they're doing. So in Japan, they have mandates of this thing. India, as of late 2024, what we have surveyed, that does not have a specific dedicated cyber security regulation. For only now, recently they joined IMDRF as an affiliate member, again this thing. So India is rapidly developing in digital healthcare sector, increasing the need for robust medical device cyber security regulations. So since other countries, they are actually the big group and they have separate research they are doing, so I think that this is very, very essential in our country, at least to start with the thing, because we understand that particularly the vendors, they don't have any responsibilities, they are not giving anything. So even what is the material, for somebody it may not work well. So that, and there are many such issues. If it is not transparent, that what are the circuits, how do I incorporate the security part also, if they don't give us the thing. Even the Boston, one is the very well known and this thing, that the Boston ICDs, that conference, they have in India that near Delhi, their own branches there. When we contacted, they told, no, we cannot give anything. So this is the status. So okay, now time is not there, there are many issues, so at least I start to tell that what is a very, very important thing. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Would like to move to the second talk now. After an academic talk, we are here to listen to Ms. Kamini Malhotra from SAG, the Scientific Analysis Group of DRDO.
Thank you, Professor Soumitra, for that introduction. And thank you, INA, for letting me step in for my director, who was initially scheduled to give this talk. And it is indeed a privilege for me to be talking in front of the eminence of Dr. Somnath, Dr. Patil, and Dr. P.S. Goyal, and also all the youngsters who are present here, whom I think I'll be able to enthuse on the points that I have thought, and I want to share with you that the directions that we may go in the area of multi-domain connected systems. So this would be the flow, and since I will be talking about the policy and verification in multi-domain connected network scenarios, I will just share with the youngsters who would really need to know at what we actually mean by policy, what are the multi-domain scenarios, and the two that I'm targeting are the smart city and the Internet of Battlefield of Things, but in a very at a very high level. I'm not going to the depth of the techniques, but at a very high level, the kind of policies that we need to have, some are already there, and what we need to have so that to go in the future directions. I'll also discuss upon the friction that lies in the multi-domain scenarios, and the point of the highlight of the points that I want to discuss in my talk are primarily on the data provenance, the microsegmentation, and the edge computing aspects, which have been touched upon yesterday also, but in the context of policies and verification, wherein fits in, and the work that we are required to do in future. And of course, the homework that I was given. So the homework slide is also there. I hope the INA would be happy. So what is a policy? It is a set of rules that define the desired behavior. The desired behavior is what is dictated by the management, what is mandated by the management of the interconnected devices, how they have to be interconnected, how the user needs to interface with them, how the applications need to reside, how the applications need to behave, and how the data flows have to happen. So the policies are the intent, and they are the ones which govern a connected system. They serve, and why they are there, of course, we all know that they serve to enforce consistency, security, operational efficiency, and the entire network. Today we talk about how to enforce the zero trust, and the zero trust has to be there, starting from the data source, the data contents, the devices which process the data, the applications again which process the data, and then they give us some outputs, and the communications, because ultimately in connected scenario, they'll be communicated through some ways. So policies are the one which completely govern the entire thing. We all know about, and most of you have read about, primarily the access control policies, which define who and what can access a resource, who and what can how the data has to be accessed, how the applications have to be accessed. The humans, both for the humans and for the machines. We have our passwords, we have our PINs, the OTPs coming in. And at a higher level, we know, we can talk about the role-based access control, we can talk about the attribute-based role control. So access control policies have been widely studied, implemented in different kind of scenarios. Then policies are there in place for the configurations, which is the most vital part in a connected system are the configurations. That is the point where a malicious entity comes into your network if you're not configured properly. So configurations are with respect to your application layer protocols, your transport layer protocols. So the policies with respect to configurations depend upon the use case where you are putting your systems, and they are the policies of real critical importance. Then how the data flow has to take place. The data can have different sensitivity, how the networking has to do, whether you're using a wireless, you have to use a Wi-Fi, you have to use a LoRa, you have to use a cellular, or you have to use Ethernet or a fiber or what. So all these kind of networking technologies also are a part of it. Then the policies are what is a normal behavior, how the system has to behave if there is a degraded. So we have to put in, the policies tell us what preventive controls we have to put in. They tell us what reactive controls we have to put in. So starting from the management intent, the policies or the guidelines, they tell us what are the controls that we need to put in such connected system so that the system is operational and the system is secure. Ultimately, the aim is to prevent data breaches and to prevent data leaks and to enforce the zero trust on data source, data contents, applications, and devices. Now, what do I mean by multi-domain? So multi-domain refers to integration and operations of different kind of systems, technologies, missions across multiple operations, environments, or domains. And each of these domains will have its own characteristics, its own constraints, it has its own trust requirements, and it may also have different authorities. Maybe in a big system, say for example like a smart city, the municipal corporation is maybe interacting with the police. So there are different regulations. Then again, there are different technologies in place. So a multi-domain refers to different entities in the entire domain. So domain is what is decided by us. The users are the ones who will decide what the domain is. So domain itself is dynamic. Domain is not a static identity. So the whole scenario is very dynamic. Data and decisions must flow securely and reliably across these domains, and each domain will have its own risk. So that is, they will have their own attack surface. So you need to put in controls for that attack surface, and when they integrate, they give rise to a new attack surface. So what is it that can make such a heterogeneous multi-domain environment work is the policies. The policies, and the second part is the verification. Now verification part is what my lab does. So I come from the area of verification. So policies have to respect each other's domain also. They cannot work in isolation. They have to ensure interoperability without compromising security. They need to maintain consistent enforcement across all domains and function even in the degraded environment. So the main thing is, it is the policies which govern it. So just to dive a little bit deeper is like, in generally, if we, in the context of defense or in context of critical infrastructure, the major domains would be, there would be a cyber domain, and the cyber domain, of course, the IT systems, the networks, the servers, the security policies, which focus on data, of course, and the primary intent is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Then there can be an operational domain also, like in terms of the industrial control systems or the SCADA systems, the power grid, the water treatment plants. Then, of course, a very important part is the communication domain, which can well range from the tactical radios to satellite links to cellulars or different kind of Wi-Fi technologies, which have their own constraints on bandwidth, and they have every technique will have different way of providing the security. So that will be different. Then in these multi-domain scenarios, a lot of it is like on the cloud. So cloud and edge have become an important part of multi-domain scenarios. IoT and embedded systems, again, are a part of these. And a very critical and crucial part is the human. So this is generally a scenario, and so just projecting this scenario onto a smart city kind of a use case, we would have to do a transportation will be one domain, a smart mobility will be, then energy and utilities, water and environment management. So while I'm speaking each of them, please go and connect back to, they are under different regulatory authority, they'll have their own processes. So now they all have to interoperate, and they have their own regulations, and they all have to interoperate, and each of them will be using a separate set of technology. So their cyber domain will be different, their network domain will be different. So all them have to interoperate now. So we can go on, and we can go, this is just first level of granularity. We can go we can dive a little bit down, and we have to go to the other layers which are important. Now coming to this Internet of Battlefield of Things, a similar picture was flashed yesterday also, wherein, of course, you'll have a command center. You may have soldiers which are also connected. They are wearing some wearable devices, and artillery which is maybe, again, communicating and networked. So this scenario, which is geographically in a very different kind of environments, so they pose different kind of pictures. So if just talking a little about the IOBTs, the network and the cyber domains are very crucial in IOBTs. The data security domains are very crucial, like the data could be in some domain, it could be unclassified, and in some domain it could be confidential. And there could be, in sometimes, different countries also collaborating in these domains. So they also part, and their regulations will be different from our regulations. And similar to analogous to the data security, in a military parlance, we can have privacy concerns in the smart city, so that they also have to be taken into account. Then, of course, the computing domain, the application domain, we can have a combat domain. So these domains will be dictated by us, depending upon how we want to configure our multiple domain scenario. So mission priorities and constraints. Now the important part is that the mission priorities and constraints may change, and the rules have to change on the fly. But again, we have to be secure. And a system that spans several of these domains may be there. And so then just to highlight this, I just put in a sketch here. And it could be like one segment could be having sensors, it could be having drones, vehicles, and that is having 5G and maybe LoRa, and some radios and unclassified data. And in other segment, the segment 2 may be having some artillery, there may be some 2 mission sub-centers there which are connected through 5G, Wi-Fi, fiber, it may be having classified data. And there are multiple of such segments which different kind of mission requirements. And then there is a central command and control cloud which is dictating. But what may happen is that one of the links may go down. Of course, there are redundant links given, but it may so happen that on the fly, a decision has to be taken, now what a segment 1 has to do. So in that case of scenarios, what is required to be done and how we can enforce our policies. I'm coming not only with respect to the operationalization, of course. Edge has been very widely used, and it is coming up as a big technology for operationalizing such scenarios. But I have to talk in terms of policy enforcement and policy verification. So now coming to what the multi-domain friction is. there are challenges at the boundaries of these segments. If, say, for example, this is just one few things that came to my mind. So this nothing exhaustive. It's a very, very top layer. How does a drone edge AI access satellite intelligence classified above it domains? Now, who takes the decision there? And it has to be done in a mission board. How do coalition partners share data without violating national policies? How do you verify that a field sensor hasn't been tampered with before trusting its data? So a lot of these technologies are put in place. But in a big scenario, how do you ensure that this policy is being verified? So to do that, enforcement is there and that verification is there. How do we do? So the interdomain policies we see are not smooth, and they have to be smoothened out in the multi-domain scenarios. And maybe the policies are the glue and they are the lubricant. So the policies have to be very thoughtfully formulated, very thoughtfully enforced, and verified. So there are a lot of standards which are available for such environments, like for IoT 27400 is available. For WAN, basically they are on a WAN kind of a fabric. So there are guidelines 27002 is available. SAG itself has a document on guidelines for network security for WAN, and we are about to be releasing one on IoTs. So these things are there and controls are in place. But there are some points that I would want. Now these guidelines don't tell what exact technology has to go in. They just tell a high-level intent that yes, access control has to be there. Now what exactly has to be there it depends on the user who's putting up the network. So with my experience, I feel some of the technology which can be there for policy enforcement, with respect to policy enforcement. So those are 3 points for data provenance, microsegmentation, and edge computing. So coming to what data provenance is, it is a record of where data came from, how it was generated, and during its journey from different nodes to its final destination node, how it has got transformed, where it has moved, whom it has interacted with across its life cycle. And this becomes very important in a multi-domain scenario. So this tracks the origin, the movement, and the transformation. Why this required is, in my terms, it is required for policy verification. So it supports policy decisions, and it is critical for auditability. So policies on data provenance for trust on data and who has handled it, so they should be a part of the policies. Provenance techniques, a lot of provenance techniques are available. So like we have security audit logs, we have Merkle tree hashing, blockchains, of course. Blockchain is a big contender for in an IoT enabled, but like blockchains are really computationally very heavy, and but people are still researching in an IoT scenarios how we can use blockchain for data provenance. So those are existing. But my point is that maybe something more intrinsic is there. The data is traveling various paths. So these are my thoughts that we need something more intrinsic, and each packet to tell its own story. We may need to put in something at the networking part of it. Say, for example, when we are communicating the data on wireless. So there's something maybe there, or some other technique may be there but the data packet, each packet of data which traverses these multi-domain scenarios, it has to tell its own story where it comes from. So with respect to that, we have a lot of, this is also an area of research which is going on. At SAG, we have collaborated with IIT Delhi, and we have come up with some way wherein we used a part of the payload in Wi-Fi and LoRa, where we can put in at every hop, some information is put in about where the data is coming from. And finally, we were able to trace it. But that is only at a research stage. We need some production kind of scenarios where we can give it in such a heterogeneous and a very insecure type of environments. We need some techniques, but at the policy level, it has to be there. Some data provenance has to be there. So I would say maybe something in the standard itself, it has to be there. Another technique is the microsegmentation. Again, microsegmentation is the logical isolation of systems, workloads, and data flows. And it is primarily done to contain an infection. If there is an infection, so you're able to contain it in a small part. But I want to use it for policy. As a policy, the microsegmentation has to be there, and it has to be there at the workload levels. And with virtualization coming in, I think it is not difficult to do it. So this is my second recommendation is with respect to the microsegmentation within the segments. But our problem is the segments are not well defined. How do we define the microsegments? So for that, we will require to go in for some context-aware AI-driven microsegmentation at the edge. So these are it's still an area of research, and we have still not started working on it per se, but yes, this is what I feel should be there. Now, with respect to policy enforcement, how these policies need to be enforced. Of course, we can formulate policies on data provenance. We can formulate policies with respect to microsegmentations. But ultimately, in a big scenario, we need to enforce these policies. And so the current limitations may be that static policies fail in dynamic or contested environments. A centralized enforcement creates single point of failure. The policy conflicts across layers and domains. There are policy conflicts along layers and domains, and it is a very, very, very critical part of it. In fact, we at SAG have done it at a very low level of finding out the conflicts in firewalls. So our organizational networks, everyone has a firewall. So firewalls are pretty much static in a way, but even we found out that there are a lot of conflicts in the rules that you set, and nobody checks it. And the firewalls don't give you a provision of checking those rules. So at SAG, we have developed a software based on formal methods where we can do this policy conflict checks on the firewalls, which can be, they are generally at the peripheries of a part or a sub-network of the complete organizational network. So that itself was a difficult task, and we have put it in our network. So we have deployed it. That formally doing it was a difficult task. Now think of it doing it in a segment which is dynamic, and we want to do it at the edge. So that is what at least we should aim for, a kind of a formal verification of conflicts, that conflicts don't happen. And since the input will be coming from different domains, and when you change policies in one domain, it actually hits the entire domain, and it gives rise to a lot of hidden paths, which also need to be found out formally, which itself is a huge order. So that is the direction that we should be going in. And then, of course, we need to have, as far as the current is concerned, the policy effectiveness, whether the policies are effective or not, that is the verification part of it. So there's a very limited visibility if we are going to talk in a centralized kind of a scenario. So edge computing is what is being talked about today. So I'm talking about edge computing for policy enforcement also, so that there is cross-domain consistency, autonomous decision making. Yeah, so yesterday also we talked about the edge has to be autonomous. The edge has to be context aware. So they are just one sentences, but I think there is a lot of work behind each sentence. And then we have to talk about real-time verification and adaptability. So these are just some, what are the strengths and what are the cons of the centralized and distributed policy enforcement. What we actually need to have is a hybrid policy enforcement where, so this is just my thoughts. It's not a very, something that I've put in a lot of my mind on the design, so there will be a lot of if and whys in it. But, so there could be a cloud, which is actually the main brain of the policies, and then there are some federated edges, and which are the regional policy decision points, where the provenance can also happen. They can look into the provenance aspect of it, then aggregate or any reconciliation that has to be done, and we get down to the level of some local edges, where using some there have to be some microsegments there which are controlled by some SDNs or some firewall agents, and these are being fed by not by the radios and the IoTs that I have shown. Mainly, they are being fed by the different segments. And the segments are the ones which will have these different components. So maybe a hierarchical approach to policy enforcement with, with the edge being context aware, with the edge being autonomous, so that it is able to take some decisions on its own, and a lot of AI to be implemented in there with care, with caution, as was brought about yesterday. So maybe that is a scenario we should be moving towards. So with that, this is my homework slide. So that is towards autonomous, verifiable policy formulation and enforcement in multi-domain connected systems. So data provenance as policy. Of course, we will put it in our document. So, or if it becomes a part of the standard, it would be good. Then combining edge and microsegmentation for hybrid policy enforcement. AIML-based context-aware policy adaptation and validation. And formal models and formal verification of policies. It's a lot of area of research. It is a difficult area, and people generally don't get enthused into. It becomes difficult for us to even collaborate with academic institutes. So we tried to do it with IT Delhi, but we could not do it. So we did it with IT Bhubaneswar. Somewhat we were successful. Then I have a small team which works on this. So I think if I can enthuse some people here, so IT Kanpur, I think is the right place I have come to maybe enthuse people work in this area, so that these multi-domain scenarios, today we are very piecemeal, like few solutions, like yesterday we talked about Wi-Fi, we talked about cellular, but they are only thinking about the integration part of it. The policies part of it, I think nobody even thinks at the stage of while you are developing a technique. So I think if we have techniques, and first the techniques as to how we can do it formally, then maybe perhaps they'll start to the standards, or the people who are doing the baseline network, the baseline technology components, maybe they'll start to think about the policies also. So that is what my thoughts are, and thank you so much.
Our third speaker in today's session is Dr. Shashwat Rajada.
Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, ladies. I will be, over the next 30 minutes, I will give you a perspective of what happened when cyber systems hit the automotive industry. So this is a perspective, a first-hand perspective of what we encountered. So as we know, cyber physical systems are it's the intersection of two distinct domains. The first is traditional physical systems, which are very sound engineering, which go through rigors of testing and, excellence therein for perfection. The other are computer systems where, it's a generic mission mode where you want to reach the market before the competitor, and therefore you are not very much bothered about quality, and, you cover it up with patches, left, right, and center. So it's an intersection of two disciplines which are kind of uncommon. But if you look at it as to how it interplays in automotives, we have to understand that I would just ask you, what would be a most perfectly secure car? Can you just imagine? I guess something like this, because it is not connected. So I brought up the point that zero connectivity means zero this thing. But this is not what the world is. The world has moved on, and with these new advances, there were more and more hacks on cars. But nobody gave it any thought. Till such time, these two gentlemen over here, Charlie Miller and Chris Palasic, what they did was they gave a live hacking show. They contacted this journalist, told him to buy a car and take it off. And as he was driving, sitting hundreds of miles away, they hacked into this particular car. It's a Jeep Cherokee, 2015, and the world then realized. Because sitting at remote, this hacker was able to enter the car through its telemetry unit, infotainment system, into the internal CAN, and was able to do multiple things like disable the brake, alter with the steering, switch the car engine. He was able to switch on the AC, switch off, control the infotainment system, play anything over there. So that was the time when the world woke up that, yes, cyber threats are a real thing. They're not a science fiction thing. And since then, our industry, the automotive industry, is working day and night to make sure that such hacks don't happen. But they do happen. So last year, as we speak, there were around close to 26 major hacks that were there. But you'll wonder how or why does this happen? The reason is the modern car that is there is not a standalone one. It's connected. If you look into the slide, you'll find that there are around 16 different methods of connecting to the external world. These include connecting to the cloud. Is it? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So if you look at this, there are around 16 different ways that we have put in over here where a vehicle is connected to the external net. And every external connection is a point of entry for a hacker, which in cybersecurity is known as an attack vector. So these are the paths by which an attacker can hack in. And if external networks weren't on, we have internal networks, which are controller area networks. There are small electronic control units which are controlling different parts of the system. There are sensors and actuators connected to it. And it's a network which is inside it. It's called the controller area network. It was made in the 80s and the 90s just to save the wiring harness. And it did. About 90% reduced the wiring costs. But it created a system where there is a protocol which doesn't have authentication and encryption and things like that running. So all that the hacker has to do is use the external network to get into the car and then get into a gateway of this CAN. And thereafter, it's pretty easy for him to do anything. And that's what the two hackers had done. And then what happens is, as we are looking at these, cars are getting more and more artificial intelligence, and they are moving towards autonomous cars. This slide shows the different levels of automation as defined by SAE, the Society of Automotive Engineers. And right now, in our country, we are somewhere at level 2. Tesla has moved to level 4. But more and more AI is coming, more and more models are coming into the car. And as more and more models are coming into the car, the complexity is increasing. For example, if it's a driverless car and you put in a coordinates, you want to go to place X, and somebody hacks in and hijacks the car to place Y, there's very little you can do. So as these use cases develop, the security requirements of implementing it also increase. What the automotive industry aspires to do is the intelligent transportation system, one of the domains which the previous speaker had just spoken about, where mobility she brought out. So here we want to integrate people, the road, and the vehicle together with ICT in a cyber-physical system so that we can, do multiple applications like emergency vehicle notification. If there's an accident, you can use other way. You can have variable speed control. You can have dynamic control of traffic lights. Multiple use cases that are going to save time and make things safe. But then again, all these come at a peril. So these were the major issues that were there, and I'll take a slight digress from the core topic and just ask you, have you ever seen these kind of mails coming? Yeah? And have you seen this kind of a mail coming? Anybody, what's this? Ransomware, and I hope nobody has got it, because this ransomware means that you have to pay a certain amount in Bitcoin. Now these use cases are coming in the car. So imagine you're driving somewhere and all of a sudden your infotainment system comes up, pay up, right? Things are so complex that you don't even have a keyboard to pay something, right? So this is the reality of what we are going to see in the future, and it's called Jackware. And it had hit a hotel somewhere 4 or 5 years back, which, this hotel went on for smart systems, cyber-physical systems, when the ransomware locked all the rooms. So the guests of this hotel were either inside the room or outside the room. They couldn't do anything. The hotel tried everything, but nothing happened. So these are the future use cases. They had to pay the Bitcoin ransom and, and then get their guests out. So such a thing hitting our industry is a nightmare. But what makes cybersecurity in this domain complicated? See, car manufacturers manufacture only 10 to 20% of the parts, the core engineering part. Balance comes through a series of suppliers. So if you look at this car, almost 80 to 90% parts are coming from suppliers. And each supplier has got its own design philosophy. He has to be bought in to understand the OEM or the car manufacturer's strategy for cybersecurity. So this extensive supply chain makes things very complicated. You have to tell almost everybody how you want this car to be secure. The second major thing is, normally, if you look at, at any other product, its shelf life is how much? 18 months, 1 year, few months. But a car has to be supported for multiple generations. So this is a car, Toyota Corolla, right, from 66 to 2006. There are several generations there. So we are looking at a lifespan of anything 30 to 40 years. Is this better? Yeah. So we are looking at a lifespan of around 30 to 40 years. So now, as we are speaking today, we have to look at future trends that are supposed to be there. Something like maybe today, if I am designing a car, I have to preempt that another 10 years there would be quantum attacks. There might be requirement of doing a post-quantum right now. For your information, a CA, a certification authority in India today, as per the IT Act, has its keys for maximum 3 years or 4 years. When we insert cryptographic credentials in a car, we are expected for it to serve over 30 years, and that's quite a time. So our key management, our crypto credential management has to be top-notch to meet these rigors. Another point is the amount of code that is inside a modern car, right? Somebody did a study around 5 years back, and he found out that a modern high-end car has close to 100 million lines of code, and that was around 4 or 5 years back. Now if we look at it, it's roughly 200 to 300 million lines of code across multiple ECUs where communication is happening, and we can do a comparison with other devices which are there. So you can see those, the amount of code that has come in means there's a rule in software engineering, for every 1,000 lines of code, you have one bug. And for every 1,000 bugs, there is a one critical bug. And these are the bugs which the hackers try to exploit. And given the vast lines of codes that are there, you know the amount of vulnerability that is going to be there. And it is for this reason that the motor industry adapted standards like MISTRA very early on, much before anybody else did, mainly because of safety and security. Our next step over here is moving towards a paradigm of software-defined vehicles, where we say that, okay, let's do away with the low-power microcontrollers, bring in domains with high compute devices. So one high compute device should be able to replace multiple microcontrollers. So those kind of paradigms we are moving through, and software is therefore becoming more and more supreme, and with it, it brings its own sets of vulnerabilities. Another use case is where component replacement challenge. So you have got a car, the car has got a vehicle information, it's a specific car, it's got a specific crypto key, and one of the device goes bad, it has to be replaced. So now challenge comes, you get a device, you configure it with the keys for your configuration of the car, right? So that level of traceability we have started building into our systems, and that's the only way we can support and address the cyber challenges. Another problem that we see is your car goes through multiple stakeholders. It's not only your car, it is the car of the logistic agency when it is being supplied, it is with the dealership. If you put it into a parking lot or if you give it to a valet, it's with the valet. So your stakeholders who are handling the car change at different parts of time. When you give it to a service station, you are giving somebody your car and saying, okay, do whatever you want with it. So those are points where security or insecurity comes in. Handling those kind of issues. And finally, we have an abundance of legislation that keeps on coming. And we have to adapt to these new laws and also better performance software. So all this continuous adaptation has to happen. With these challenges that we are having, how did the automotive industry reply? We came up with a thing known as standards and regulations. And these standards and regulations enabled a uniform playing field for all the automotive players. And the way it is implemented is through these challenges, through these compliances. Now, when you see UN, it's United Nations. And I'm sure some of you would wonder why UN is over here. Anybody thought? So major player in the auto industry is what is known as UNECE, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. So what they do is, since Europe is a collection of multiple countries, they as a body have standardized requirements for automotive for these countries. And countries that are following it, they have a collaboration so that, across every country you don't have a different rule as such. So there's the standardization that has come in. And this standardization came up with these rules, Reg 155, Reg 156, and also there were a few standards that had come in. So these regulations give, any questions? Yeah, sorry. So these regulations mandate car manufacturers to perform certain actions which are supported by standards that are there. So how it works is, anytime somebody wants to come up with a new car, a new model, they have to go to a country's vehicle type approval authority. They go to this vehicle type of authority and say that, hey, this is a new car that I want to launch. So this type of vehicle type authority, he says that, okay, you want to do it, but first show me that you comply to all the requirements that have been spelled out in these standards. A thorough assessment has done whether due diligence has been performed across this entire manufacturing process, and then only the vehicle type approval will be given. Once this vehicle type approval is given, then only the car can be sold. Okay? So we had the speaker before coming up with this wonderful concept of security by design, and that's what this standard asks us to do. Security is never an afterthought. It is put into the system right from the concept stage. So today, as we speak, I'm looking at designs that are going to hit the market in 2029 and 2030, and I'm working on the security concept for that today. Okay? So this entire process starts off with something known as a threat and risk analysis, where we envisage what the threats the car would be having, what are the risks of those threats. Based on that, we build up a platform security concept, that is how I'm going to secure my car. We go in for what is known as secure implementation. We have the verification and validation, which the previous speaker spoke about. We go for secure production, and then we move on to lifecycle support. So let me navigate you through these steps. Threat modeling is, we look at a car, we see what are the possible hacks that are there, we do extensive research, and then find out what are the threats. We have a mathematical modeling by which we find out the risk level, and then based on this risk level, we determine the countermeasure requirements that are there. When these requirements are listed out, we look into the car again, see what can be done at a component level, what has to be done at the internal network level, what has to be done with the external interfaces, and that's how we come up with the security concept. This concept articulates into requirements, and when we look at these requirements, it's mind-boggling number. For mid-size car, we have roughly around 40,000 requirements that are there. That's the kind of figure that we are looking at it. Then we have the next phase where these requirements are implemented. Implementation in hardware and software. We have lots of industry best practices that we need to follow. Things like MISTRA, things like CERT, things like checking the weaknesses which are already been reported. So once the secure implementation is done, we have a process of verification validation. It is done at the component level, it's done at the complete platform level. So different types of tests are put in it. So these include vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, pretty standard. But amongst all this, point number 5, fuzz testing is something that is very new and very unique for us. Here, we try to mimic attacks that have not happened. So attacks that have not happened, that have not been reported, how we do it is, we keep on bombarding our cars with different kind of malformed inputs and see how it reacts, sees what its breaking point is. We injected millions and millions different test cases, try to find out, okay, somewhere down the line, some mistake would have been there in maybe the priority scheduler or in somewhere else. And that's how we try to preempt a hack before it even happens. Once this V&V step is done, we get into secure manufacturing. Again, a very complicated business because this is where the keys, the crypto credentials are injected. So in the plants, we have something known as plant key management system where the keys are there. This actually conflicts with the existing principles of design and manufacturing. Like you have design for testability. In your boards, you have different test points. Now, test point for a hacker is a way to enter the system. So there's always this conflict between different domains. That has to be worked out. And a structured approach is done where we say that, okay, debug ports have to be closed, your fuses have to be burned, all those activities are done. Once this is done, then only can we ship the car. Life doesn't stop there. We have something known as life cycle support. We continuously monitor our cars. This is a typical way where we see that, okay, any abnormality in the car is there. So a lot of data keeps on going up and down, where we try to see that any indicators of compromise is there. So that's the detect phase. If there is anything, it has to be reported. We do a triaging, see how serious it is. If it's very complicated, an incident is raised. If it isn't complicated, it's put up for the next patch release. So this way, we are able to support our cars in the life cycle. And then we also need to change, update the software periodically. AI models get revised. Security bug fixes need to be put. So software being so important in the car, there is a new standard that has come up for software update engineering. It's called ISO 24089. And that is enforced through UN regulation, UNECE R156. And our country is also adopting it. It is called AIS 190. So here, the rigors are so strong that a vehicle type approval authority may tell that, okay, a specific car number, I want to find out what is the configuration of the software in its engine control ECU. So that version also I should have the wherewithal to get it out. What does my system show? What is there in existing? And the ability to update software on the fly is a big boon for the industry because this saves me millions of dollars in recall call. If I didn't have this ability, I would have to do a recall, and a recall costs a huge amount. So this is what is happening in our industry. And to look at the next steps, what we can see is that there's going to be an increase in standards because of AI, because of cybersecurity. These standards are coming on the fly. For ITS, there are over 100 different standards that have already been published globally. So these we need to incorporate into our ecosystem also. There has to be active research on implementing of these standards. And these are just some of them. It also gives us to new opportunities in AI domain, in cybersecurity domain, in functional safety domain, in privacy domain. So there are new jobs that can be created, and a concrete recommendation would be to orient our courses towards these. And if I look, which ma'am in our first session had said, the Cybersecurity Resilience Act, it's already there in 2024, but 2027 is the D-Day when Europe will have to implement cybersecurity in each of its products. And what the CRA is wanting today is what the automotive industry has already done. Secure by design, continuous updates, almost everything is the same. And this is a great opportunity for India because India, there are a lot of global capability centers, GCCs, which are supporting European Union products. So this is a great opportunity for us outside the automotive domain. And for looking at, again, outside the automotive domain, there is a standard known as IEC 62443, which tells how products can be secured. So this would be an interesting work body for people outside our domain, automotive domain, to look into. So this is an area where we can look into. So that's about all.